The Nexus graveyard had a name that preceded its reputation, and a reputation that preceded its reality. Even the most hardened veterans of the Galactic Council's forces spoke of it in whispers, a twisted region of space where the laws of physics went to die, where gravity folded in on itself like origami made of nightmares, and where radiation storms could strip the electrons from an atom while leaving the nucleus to contemplate its loneliness. For 12 standard years, it had claimed 12 fleets. Not destroyed them, mind you, claimed them. There's a difference between destruction and what happened in the graveyard. Destruction leaves debris. The graveyard left questions. The Corinthian 3rd Expeditionary Force had been the first to vanish. 200 ships, 60,000 of the galaxy's finest warriors, armed with weapons that could crack moons and shields that could deflect stellar flares. They entered the graveyard's edge with sensor arrays painting the void in careful detail, with backup communications, with every protocol the Corinthian Empire had developed over 3 millennia of spacefaring warfare. 14 hours later, their flagship's emergency beacon activated for exactly 4.7 seconds before cutting to eternal silence. The rescue mission found nothing. Not wreckage, not energy signatures, not even the quantum echoes that should have lingered where such a massive force had existed. The graveyard had swallowed them as completely as darkness swallows light, and with about as much ceremony. 11 more fleets followed over the years. The Zilani Corsairs, masters of void navigation who could thread a needle through a black hole's event horizon. Gone. The Thaxian Dreadnought Division, whose capital ships were mobile fortresses that had never known defeat. Vanished. The Joint Task Force of the Outer Rim Alliance, equipped with the most advanced sensor technology 36 species could devise, disappeared so thoroughly that some began to theorize they had never existed at all. Each loss taught the galaxy the same lesson. The Nexus graveyard was not merely dangerous. It was selectively hostile, intelligently malevolent, and utterly impassable. The finest scientific minds in known space had catalogued its hazards with the methodical precision of scholars documenting their own mortality. Gravitational shears that could turn a battleship into a pasta strand. Radiation cascades that rewrote the fundamental constants of matter. Energy-based life forms that fed on the bioelectric fields of living beings. Creatures that had evolved in the spaces between atoms and hunted by orchestrating quantum collapses. And through it all, threading the graveyard like a cosmic needle, lay the only stable hyperspace corridor between the inner rim and the outer territories. The sole passage that could accommodate large-scale fleet movements across the galactic divide. Every other route would take months of careful navigation through dozens of star systems, each requiring fuel, supplies, and time that no military force in recorded history had ever possessed for such an operation. The corridor was a strategic choke point of incalculable value, and it was completely, absolutely, and demonstrably impassable. Until the morning when Admiral Kexathera of the Galactic Council Defense Force received a data packet that would change everything humanity thought they knew about impossibility. The packet had come through routine intelligence channels, marked with the mundane designation of a training exercise report. The sender was listed as Human Colonial Defense Academy, Titan Station, Sol System. The subject line read, Post-exercise analysis, Nexus navigation trials, class of 23H7, standard difficulty. A standard difficulty. Admiral Kexathera stared at those words until his 4 eyes began to water, until his translator implant started questioning its own linguistic protocols. He read the report once, then twice, then a third time with the careful attention of someone diffusing a bomb made of mathematics. The humans, it appeared, had been using the Nexus graveyard as a training ground for their military cadets. For 96 standard years. The report that shattered Admiral Kexathera's understanding of reality was written in the bureaucratic language of military training assessments, complete with performance metrics, statistical analyses, and the kind of casual professionalism that suggested the authors had never once considered their subject matter to be anything other than routine. Cadet mortality rates for this cycle's Nexus trials remain within acceptable parameters at 2.3%, representing a marginal improvement over the previous term's 2.7%. Primary cause of fatalities continues to be overconfidence during energy predator encounters, with secondary losses attributed to navigation errors in the spiral maze gravitational complex. Kexathera's primary heart stopped beating for a full 3 seconds. His species had evolved redundant cardiovascular systems specifically to prevent exactly this kind of shock-induced system failure, but evolution had never anticipated a universe where the phrase acceptable mortality rates could be applied to the Nexus graveyard. He continued reading with the morbid fascination of someone watching their own execution. Cadet Yamamoto achieved the cycle's highest predator kill count with 47 confirmed eliminations, though her aggressive tactics resulted in a formal reprimand for excessive ordnance expenditure. The training command reminds all instructors that while initiative is encouraged, ammunition costs are still subject to Academy budgetary constraints. The energy predators. The entities that had haunted the nightmares of galactic cartographers for centuries, creatures that existed in quantum superposition until they detected the bioelectric fields of complex nervous systems. The Corinthian fleet's final transmission had contained a 12-minute recording of their psychic screams as these beings fed on the terror centers of their brains. The recording was classified at the highest levels, accessible only to those with clearance to handle weapons of mass psychological destruction. Humans were apparently giving them scores and arguing about ammunition budgets. Environmental hazard assessment for Grid 7 remains unchanged. The Class C gravitational anomaly continues to provide adequate training for spatial awareness under accelerated reference frame distortion. Recommendation: increase difficulty by introducing additional vector complications. Current scenario may be too predictable for advanced cadets. Too predictable. The gravitational shears that had twisted the Zilani Corsairs into subatomic particles were, in the professional opinion of human military instructors, too predictable. Kexathara set down the report and activated his secure communication array. The message he composed was marked with priority codes that had never been used outside of galactic extinction scenarios. Emergency session requested, council chambers, immediate attendance required, subject, humanity. Within 6 hours, representatives from 47 species had gathered in the crystalline chambers of the Galactic Council, their thoughts churning with the implications of what they had learned. The Thaxians, whose warrior culture venerated strength above all other virtues, sat in stunned silence. The Zilani, master navigators who had mapped the treacherous currents of 1,000 stellar phenomena, looked as though they were questioning everything they had ever believed about the nature of space itself. Chancellor Morvik of the Hegemony spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had just discovered that his species' greatest military achievements were apparently recreational activities for another civilization's children. Are we certain this intelligence is accurate? Cross-referenced with 40 different human educational databases, Kexathara replied. Their military academies maintain public records of their training curricula. The Nexus Graveyard appears in their course catalogs under Intermediate Navigation Challenges. It's listed as a prerequisite for advanced combat deployment. What do they consider advanced? Asked the Corinthian delegate, her voice hollow with the implications. The answer came from the intelligence dossier that Kexathara had compiled during the emergency session's preparation. He read it aloud, each word falling into the chamber like stones into a deep well. Advanced human naval exercises include live-fire maneuvers within stellar coronas, extended deployment scenarios in dark matter storms, and what they term hostile universe adaptation training, conducted in regions of space where the fundamental constants of physics are unstable. The chamber fell silent. Outside the windows, stars continued their ancient dance, but suddenly they seemed less like distant suns and more like the campfires of gods who played games that mortals were never meant to understand. The emergency session was interrupted by an alert that sent ice through the veins of every being in the chamber. The holographic display at the center of the council room flickered to life, showing a tactical readout that had been transmitted from the deep space monitoring stations along the galactic rim. Something was coming. The sensor data painted a picture that defied comprehension. A fleet, if it could be called that, was emerging from the void between galaxies, moving with purposeful intent toward the outer territories. The ships, if they were ships, registered as massive distortions in space-time itself, their very presence warping reality around them like tumors in the fabric of existence. The Void Swarm, whispered Ambassador Zareth of the Crystalline Collective, her harmonic voice cracking with frequencies that hadn't been heard since her species' last extinction event. The legend spoke truth. For millennia, they had been myth. Stories told by deep space explorers who claimed to have seen impossible things in the darkness between star systems. Vessels that moved without engines, beings that existed without biology, weapons that unmade matter at the quantum level. The scientific community had dismissed these accounts as hallucinations brought on by long-term exposure to the psychological stresses of void travel. Now, 47 different sensor arrays were confirming that the nightmares were real. The tactical analysis scrolled across the display with remorseless precision. Estimated fleet strength, unknown, as the entities appeared to exist in quantum superposition until directly observed. Estimated arrival time at the outer rim, 4 standard months. Estimated defensive capabilities of rim colonies, statistically insignificant. Chancellor Morvek's voice cut through the stunned silence. Evacuation protocols. We implement full civilian evacuation of the outer territories immediately. To where? Admiral Kexathera's question hung in the air like a death sentence. Even if we could move 200 billion civilians, the swarm's trajectory takes them directly through the outer rim toward the core systems. The only viable defensive position is the Nexus corridor. It's the sole choke point that could limit their advance. The mathematical reality was inescapable. Any force attempting to invade the inner galaxy would have to pass through the Nexus graveyard's hyperspace corridor. It was the perfect bottleneck, the ideal place to make a stand against an unstoppable force. It was also utterly impossible to defend, because no military force in galactic history had ever survived transit through the graveyard's chaotic maze of death. We could mine the approaches, suggested General Korthax of the Hegemony's war machine. With what? Kexthera pulled up the tactical projections. The swarm's energy signatures suggest they exist partially outside normal space-time. Conventional weapons may be completely ineffective. Even if they weren't, we'd need to position defensive platforms inside the graveyard itself to have any hope of controlling the corridor. Which brought them back to the fundamental problem. The Nexus graveyard had never allowed anything larger than a reconnaissance probe to survive its crossing. The idea of establishing a military presence there was beyond impossible. It was physics denying mathematics, reality refusing logic. Unless. The thought struck Admiral Kexathara like a physical blow. He stared at the tactical display, then at the intelligence reports still scattered across his desk, then back at the display showing the approaching apocalypse. Contact the Human Colonial Defense Force, he said quietly. The chamber erupted in confused voices, multiple species talking over each other in dozens of languages and communication methods. Chancellor Morvek raised his hand for silence. Admiral, I understand the humans have unusual training methods, but this is not a training exercise. No. Kexathera agreed, his voice carrying a tone that silenced the remaining murmurs. This is a recruitment opportunity. He activated the chamber's central projection system, overlaying Human Academy training records with the approaching threat assessment. The contrast was stark. Where galactic civilization saw certain extinction, the data suggested humanity saw Tuesday. For 96 years, human military cadets have been successfully navigating the Nexus graveyard as part of their standard curriculum. Their survival rates exceed 97%. Their instructors consider the environment adequate for basic training. The implications hung in the air like a revelation waiting to be born. If the humans could not only survive the graveyard but treat it as a classroom, then perhaps, just perhaps, they could do more than survive. Perhaps they could fight. We're going to ask them to defend the galaxy, Kexthera continued, by doing what they apparently do every semester, take a routine training exercise through Hell itself, except this time Hell is coming to them. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in galactic history, the Council was going to place the fate of civilization in the hands of a species whose children played games where gods feared to tread. The response from Terra came back in 14 hours, transmitted through standard diplomatic channels with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that suggested the Human Colonial Defense Force treated requests to save galactic civilization with the same administrative precision they applied to supply requisitions. The message was brief, professional, and utterly devastating in its casual confidence. Council request acknowledged. Will deploy 3rd Deep Space Battle Group to Nexus coordinates. ETA, 16 standard days. Please forward any available intelligence on enemy capabilities. Also, please advise if Council can provide logistics support for extended operations. Our mess halls will require approximately 12,000 tons of food per week for optimal morale maintenance. Admiral Sarah Chen, HCDF. 16 days. The humans would traverse a journey that took standard naval vessels 3 months of careful navigation through a dozen star systems. They were planning to cut straight through the Nexus graveyard, treating it as a convenient shortcut rather than a cosmic death trap. Admiral Kexathera found himself staring at the message with the expression of someone watching reality revise itself in real time. The humans weren't just offering to help defend the choke point. They were offering to arrive early. They're requesting meal specifications, observed Chancellor Morvek, his voice carrying the stunned confusion of someone whose entire worldview had just been folded into origami. They want to know about morale maintenance. The intelligence briefings that followed were an exercise in controlled insanity. Every species on the Council contributed their most classified military assessments, their deepest strategic analyses, their most guarded technological secrets. The data package they assembled represented the accumulated military wisdom of 47 civilizations, spanning thousands of years of warfare. The human response arrived 6 hours later. Intelligence package received and reviewed. Void swarm tactical capabilities appear consistent with theoretical extinction class entities described in Human War College Scenario 7. Asymmetric engagement with non-causal hostiles. Will implement standard protocol Omega with minor modifications. Recommend civilian evacuation from Outer Rim proceed as planned. Combat engagement will commence upon our arrival at Nexus defensive perimeter. Standard protocol Omega. Minor modifications. The humans had reviewed the most terrifying military threat in galactic history and filed it under standard operating procedures. But it was the final line of the message that truly shattered what remained of the Council's understanding of human military doctrine. P.S. Third Battle Group includes elements of the graduating class from Titan Naval Academy. This deployment will serve as their final examination. Expect high performance due to competitive academic pressure. The silence in the Council chamber stretched until it became a physical presence, pressing against eardrums and thought processes with equal force. Somewhere in the depths of space, an apocalyptic force was bearing down on the galaxy with weapons that existed outside the normal constraints of physics. The greatest military minds in known space had looked at this threat and seen certain extinction. The humans were sending their students. Ambassador Zareth was the first to find her voice, though it emerged as a crystalline whisper that barely registered on the translation matrices. Their final examination. The follow-up intelligence reports painted a picture that defied every principle of military strategy ever developed by galactic civilization. The Third Deep Space Battle Group consisted of 47 vessels, ranging from heavy cruisers to specialized combat platforms designed for what human tactical manuals cheerfully described as hostile universe operations. The ships themselves were impressive enough, fusion-powered, gravitationally shielded, armed with weapons that converted matter directly into energy. But it was the crew composition that left the Council's military advisors questioning their own sanity. Of the 12,000 personnel assigned to the battle group, nearly 8,000 were cadets in their final year of military academy. Their average age was 22 standard years. Their combat experience consisted primarily of training exercises. Their training exercises included routine navigation through environments that had annihilated veteran forces from across the galaxy. They're children, General Korthax muttered, his warrior's pragmatism warring with the evidence before his eyes. They're sending children to fight gods. Admiral Kexathera studied the personnel files scrolling across his screen. Each cadet profile read like a recruitment poster for supernatural beings. Navigation through gravitational anomalies, survival rates in high radiation environments, combat efficiency ratings against energy-based life forms, psychological stability assessments for extended exposure to non-Euclidean geometry. These weren't children, these were the products of a civilization that had spent a century using cosmic horror as an educational tool. The first reports from the human battle group arrived 3 days ahead of schedule, transmitted from deep within the Nexus graveyard with the casual efficiency of a training exercise status update. This is Admiral Chen aboard HCDF Indomitable. Transit proceeding nominally. Current position, Grid 7, Sector 4 Alpha. Encountered minor predator swarm approximately 6 hours ago. Cadet Martinez achieved personal best with 63 confirmed kills. Academic Review Board has noted performance for final grade assessment. Admiral Kexathera stared at the message until his vision blurred. Grid 7, Sector 4 Alpha. The coordinates placed the human fleet in the heart of the gravitational maze that had torn apart the Zilani Corsairs. They were not only surviving it, they were ahead of schedule and apparently using it as a grading opportunity. But it was the follow-up intelligence that truly demonstrated the impossible nature of what they were witnessing. Long-range sensors, pushed to their absolute limits, had managed to penetrate the graveyard's interference long enough to capture fragmentary images of the human fleet in action. The footage defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about combat in the Nexus. Where veteran forces had struggled with the basic physics of navigation, human vessels moved through the gravitational distortions with an almost casual precision. They rode the gravity wells like ancient sailors riding ocean currents, using the deadly anomalies as tactical advantages rather than obstacles to overcome. In one sequence, a human destroyer deliberately positioned itself within a Class A gravitational shear, the kind of distortion that folded space back on itself, and used the temporal dilation effect to appear simultaneously in 3 different positions during an engagement with energy predators. The creatures, evolved to hunt by tracking single-point bioelectric signatures, found themselves confused and vulnerable as the human ship became a quantum paradox with gun ports. "They're not fighting the environment," whispered Dr. Zenth of the Galactic Physics Institute, his voice carrying the awe of someone watching natural laws rewrite themselves. "They're fighting with it." The human tactical doctrine revealed itself to be something beyond conventional military strategy. Where other species had tried to overcome the graveyard's hazards through superior technology or careful avoidance, humans had apparently spent a century learning to weaponize the impossible. Their ships carried specialized equipment that seemed designed specifically for conditions that should have been instantly lethal. Gravitational anchor systems that could lock onto unstable spacetime and use it as a pivot point for impossible maneuvers. Radiation collectors that converted deadly energy cascades into additional power for weapon systems. Bioelectric scramblers that masked human neural signatures from predators by mimicking the background quantum noise of the graveyard itself. But it was the psychological profiles of the human crews that painted the most disturbing picture. Standard military doctrine required extensive conditioning to prepare personnel for exposure to the graveyard's reality-distorting effects. The human cadets showed no signs of stress, disorientation, or psychological trauma. They were enjoying themselves. Intercepted communications between human vessels revealed casual conversations about scenic views of impossible stellar formations, betting pools on predator encounter rates, and complaints about the quality of the Academy's catering services. One transmission contained what appeared to be a cadet composing poetry about the beauty of watching space fold in on itself, like origami made of starlight and mathematics. Then came the intelligence update that sent ice through the council chambers. The Void Swarm had detected the human presence in the graveyard. More importantly, they had reacted to it. For the first time since emerging from dark space, the swarm had altered course. Their impossible vessels, which had been moving in perfect formation toward the outer rim colonies, suddenly shifted trajectory. They were no longer heading for the populated systems of the galactic periphery. They were racing toward the Nexus graveyard. "They're not running from the humans," Admiral Kexathera realized, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're being drawn to them." The tactical implications were staggering. Whatever intelligence guided the Void Swarm had identified the human battle group as something worthy of immediate attention. The swarm had abandoned their original invasion plan to pursue what appeared to be a single fleet of Academy graduates on a training exercise. Either the humans represented a threat so significant that it warranted complete strategic revision, or they had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple defensive action. The swarm's reaction suggested that this encounter was not just another battle. It was a convergence of forces that neither side had fully anticipated. In the depths of the Nexus graveyard, where physics went to die and sanity went to school, 2 impossible powers were about to meet for the first time. One had emerged from the void between galaxies with technology that defied comprehension. The other had spent a century teaching their children to play games in cosmic hell. The galaxy was about to discover which form of impossibility was more dangerous. The human battle group's first engagement with the Void Swarm was captured by accident, recorded by a deep space monitoring probe that had been placed decades earlier to study gravitational anomalies in the graveyard's outer regions. The footage would later be classified at the highest levels of galactic security, not because it revealed tactical secrets, but because it revealed something far more unsettling about the nature of warfare itself. The swarm emerged from dark space at the edge of the Nexus with the kind of dramatic presence that cosmic horrors apparently favored. Reality warped around their vessels like fabric stretching over thorns, and space itself seemed to recoil from their presence. Their ships, if the twisted geometries could be called ships, existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, phasing in and out of normal spacetime with predatory intent. The human response was immediate, tactical, and utterly bewildering. Instead of the desperate defensive formations that every military doctrine in the galaxy would have prescribed, the human fleet scattered into what appeared to be complete chaos. Individual vessels peeled away from the battle group and disappeared into the graveyard's maze of gravitational anomalies, moving with the practiced ease of students heading to familiar classrooms. Admiral Chen's voice came through the communications array with the calm professionalism of someone conducting a routine training exercise. "All units, implement Protocol Omega-7. Remember, this is a graded exercise. I want to see creative thinking, tactical innovation, and proper communication protocols. Cadet Squadron Alpha, you have lead on the initial contact scenario. Try not to embarrass us in front of the cosmic horror entities. The Void Swarm, which had been expecting either desperate resistance or terrified retreat, found itself facing something unprecedented in their eons of existence. A military force that treated first contact with extinction-level entities as a pop quiz. What followed defied every principle of conventional warfare. The human cadets didn't engage the swarm directly. Instead, they began using the graveyard itself as a weapon. Cadet vessels lured swarm entities into gravitational shears, where the impossible physics of the anomalies interacted catastrophically with the swarm's reality-warping technology. Energy predators, disturbed by the sudden arrival of so many new bioelectric signatures, swarmed toward the void entities with ravenous hunger. But it was Cadet Lieutenant Sarah Martinez who achieved what military historians would later classify as the most brilliantly insane tactical maneuver in recorded history. Her corvette, the HCDF Persistence, deliberately entered a Class S gravitational anomaly, a region where space-time folded back on itself in impossible configurations. The maneuver should have been instantly fatal. Instead, Martinez used the temporal distortion to create a causality loop, emerging from the anomaly at 3 different points in the timeline simultaneously. The effect on the Void Swarm was immediate and devastating. Their vessels, which existed in quantum superposition across multiple realities, suddenly found themselves trying to engage an enemy that was operating outside the normal flow of time. Their weapons, designed to unmake matter at the quantum level, couldn't target something that existed in the past, present, and future simultaneously. Outstanding work, Cadet Martinez. Admiral Chen's voice carried across the tactical network with the tone of a professor, praising a particularly clever solution to a complex problem. Temporal paradox as a defensive measure. We'll need to add that to next semester's curriculum. The swarm's response was as swift as it was horrifying. Unable to comprehend an enemy that treated cosmic impossibilities as educational opportunities, they began to retreat. But this was not the strategic withdrawal of a defeated force. It was the panicked flight of predators who had suddenly realized they were not the apex predators they had believed themselves to be. As the void entities fled back toward dark space, abandoning their invasion plans entirely, the human fleet began the routine post-exercise procedures that every military academy student knew by heart. Damage reports, performance evaluations, and tactical analysis reviews. The galaxy had been saved by a training exercise, but it was Admiral Chen's final transmission that would haunt the dreams of every council member for years to come. Council Command, this is Admiral Chen, reporting mission completion. Enemy force has withdrawn from galactic space. Cadet performance exceeded expectations. Several students demonstrated tactical innovations that will require updates to our standard doctrine. Recommend immediate implementation of new training scenarios based on today's engagement patterns. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a note of professional curiosity that chilled the blood of every listener. Also, preliminary analysis suggests the Void Swarm entities were not extinction-level threats as originally assessed. They appear to be relatively standard transdimensional predators, comparable to the entities we encounter in our advanced placement courses. I'm upgrading the difficulty rating for next year's final examinations accordingly. The communication ended, leaving the council chambers in absolute silence. Somewhere in the depths of space, the most terrifying force the galaxy had ever known was fleeing in terror from a group of students who had just realized their final exam was easier than expected. The aftermath of what galactic historians would euphemistically term the Nexus incident sent shockwaves through every level of interstellar civilization. Emergency sessions convened in government chambers across 47 worlds as species leaders struggled to process the fundamental shift in their understanding of power, warfare, and the basic nature of cosmic threats. The Corinthian Empire, whose military doctrine had shaped galactic defense strategies for 3 millennia, convened emergency war councils that lasted for days without resolution. Their finest generals sat in stunned silence, reviewing tactical footage that violated every principle they had dedicated their lives to mastering. The sight of human cadets using temporal paradoxes as defensive maneuvers had reportedly caused several veteran commanders to request early retirement. The Zalani Navigators Guild, whose members had spent centuries mapping the treacherous currents of space, formally petitioned their government to establish immediate diplomatic relations with humanity. Their reasoning was as practical as it was desperate. If human children could navigate the Nexus graveyard as a routine training exercise, what other impossible regions of space might they consider accessible? But it was the reaction of the Thaxian warrior caste that perhaps best captured the galaxy's collective psychological state. For the first time in their recorded history, the Thaxians, a species whose entire culture revolved around martial prowess and the veneration of combat skill, formally acknowledged another species as their military superiors. The ceremony was broadcast across their home system and concluded with a ritual burning of their most sacred war manuals. Dr. Zenth of the Galactic Physics Institute released a statement that became the most quoted scientific paper in galactic history. We have spent millennia developing theories about the absolute limits of physics-based warfare. Today, we learned that these limits exist only in our imagination. The humans have not broken the laws of physics. They have revealed that we never truly understood what those laws permitted. The immediate practical implications were staggering. Trade routes that had been considered permanently unusable due to cosmic hazards were suddenly reopened as human commercial vessels began offering transit services through regions that had been written off as death traps. Insurance companies across the galaxy faced bankruptcy as risk assessment models based on millennia of accumulated data became instantly obsolete. The human colonial defense force, seemingly oblivious to the cosmic paradigm shift they had triggered, issued standard post-mission reports with the bureaucratic efficiency that characterized all their communications. Admiral Chen's official after-action summary was a masterpiece of understatement that would be preserved in military academies across the galaxy as an example of supreme professional composure. Mission objectives achieved with minimal resource expenditure. Cadet performance exceeded baseline expectations across all measured categories. Recommend implementation of enhanced training scenarios to maintain competitive academic standards. Total casualties: 0. Total ammunition expenditure: below projected parameters. Total time to mission completion: ahead of schedule. The report concluded with a note that sent Council intelligence analysts into recursive loops of analysis. Preliminary xenological assessment suggests void swarm entities may represent a previously unknown category of transdimensional predator. Recommend establishment of formal research protocols for future encounters. Biology Department has expressed interest in live specimen acquisition for advanced xenobiology coursework. Live specimen acquisition. The humans were already planning to capture representatives of the most terrifying force the galaxy had ever known for their students to study. The Galactic Council's response was swift and unanimous. Within 72 hours of the incident, they had formally extended an invitation for humanity to join the Council as a founding member species, bypassing the traditional centuries-long evaluation process that new civilizations typically underwent. The human response arrived within hours, carrying the same casual professionalism that had characterized all their diplomatic communications. Council invitation acknowledged and accepted. Terra will designate Ambassador Maria Vasquez as our primary representative. Please note that Ambassador Vasquez is currently completing her doctoral dissertation on interspecies diplomatic protocols, so this assignment will serve as her thesis research. We trust this arrangement will be mutually beneficial. Even their ambassadors were students. The message included an attachment that fundamentally altered the Council's understanding of human educational methodology. It was a course catalog from the Human Colonial Defense Academy, marked as a standard curriculum overview for prospective allied species. The catalog read like a comprehensive guide to cosmic impossibility. Courses in applied gravitational manipulation, temporal mechanics for military applications, hostile universe survival techniques, and advanced xenobiology, predatory energy entities, were listed alongside more traditional subjects like interstellar navigation and fleet command protocols. But it was the prerequisites section that truly revealed the scope of human military education. To enroll in basic void navigation, students were required to have completed courses in radiation immunity conditioning, psychological resistance to non-Euclidean geometry, and elementary energy predator interaction protocols. Elementary. These were elementary courses in the human educational system. The final entry in the catalog was a simple course description that would haunt the dreams of military planners across the galaxy. Advanced Cosmic Warfare. Students will be expected to develop and implement novel solutions to extinction-level threats using only standard academy resources. Final examination consists of practical demonstration of learned principles in real-world scenarios. Prerequisite: successful completion of Nexus navigation trials. The galaxy had just been saved by a final examination. 6 months after the Nexus incident, the galaxy had begun to settle into what diplomatic historians would later term the new normal. A reality where humanity's casual relationship with cosmic impossibility had fundamentally altered the balance of interstellar power. Trade flourished through previously impassable regions. Scientific expeditions ventured into territories that had been written off as uninhabitable, and insurance companies had developed entirely new risk assessment categories labeled simply as human involvement factor. But it was the discovery transmitted from the Deep Space Monitoring Station at Kepler 442 that shattered this fragile equilibrium and revealed that the void swarm had been merely the opening act of something far more terrible. The transmission came through quantum entanglement arrays with the kind of garbled interference that suggested it had traveled through regions where the fundamental constants of reality were more like polite suggestions. The message was fragmentary, filled with static bursts and temporal echoes, but the core intelligence was unmistakable. Something else was coming, something that made the void swarm look like a minor inconvenience. Admiral Kexathara stood in the council chambers, his four eyes focused on the holographic display that showed sensor readings from the galactic rim. The data painted a picture that defied every known law of cosmic mechanics. Massive gravitational distortions were appearing in the void between galaxies, but these weren't the chaotic warping signatures that had characterized the swarm's approach. These distortions were ordered, deliberate, architectural. The monitoring station designated it as Contact Event Sigma, Kexathara reported, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering news that would redefine nightmare. Initial classification suggested a stellar engineering project of unknown origin. Revised analysis indicates something far more concerning. The hologram shifted, displaying a three-dimensional model of the approaching phenomenon. What it showed violated every principle of stellar mechanics that galactic civilization had developed over millennia of space exploration. Someone, or something, was constructing a Dyson sphere around a pulsar, in real time, while moving it toward the galaxy at near-relativistic speeds. Chancellor Morvek's voice emerged as barely a whisper. How is that possible? Current estimates suggest the construction rate exceeds our fastest automated assembly systems by a factor of several thousand, Dr. Zenth replied, his scientific training warring with the evidence before his eyes. The engineering precision required to maintain structural integrity while manipulating a neutron star's rotational dynamics. It's beyond theoretical. We're looking at technology that treats the fundamental forces of the universe as construction materials. But it was the tactical analysis that truly revealed the scope of the threat they faced. The approaching construct wasn't just a demonstration of impossible engineering, it was a weapon. The pulsar's focused energy beam was being directed and amplified through the sphere's geometric structure, creating a directed energy weapon capable of sterilizing entire star systems from interstellar distances. The entity controlling this construction, for lack of a better term, they had been designated as the architects, had apparently observed the void swarm's retreat and drawn their own conclusions about the nature of galactic civilization. Their response was not flight, but escalation. Estimated time to weapons range? Asked General Korthax, his warrior's pragmatism cutting through the stunned silence. If current trajectory and acceleration patterns hold, Kexathara consulted his tactical displays, approximately 18 standard months until the construct reaches effective firing position for core system bombardment. 18 months to prepare for an enemy that casually manipulated neutron stars as weapons components. The mathematical reality was inescapable. No conventional defense could hope to counter technology that operated on such a scale. Every fleet in the galaxy combined would be less than a minor irritation to beings who built weapons out of stellar remnants. The emergency session that followed was an exercise in controlled desperation. Every species contributed their most advanced theoretical weapons, their most exotic defensive technologies, their most classified military assets. The combined technological might of 47 civilizations was laid bare in the council chambers as representatives grasped for any solution that might allow them to survive contact with godlike entities. The conclusion was unanimous and terrifying. They had nothing. No weapon in the galactic arsenal could meaningfully damage a construct capable of manipulating pulsars. No shield technology could deflect energy outputs measured in stellar masses. No military strategy could account for enemies who treated the laws of physics as engineering guidelines. It was Ambassador Vasquez who spoke the thought that everyone in the chamber had been carefully avoiding. We need to contact the Human Defense Force again. The silence that followed was pregnant with implications. 6 months ago, they had asked humanity to defend a strategic choke point against an extinction-level threat. The humans had responded by sending their students on a training exercise that had saved the galaxy almost by accident. Now they were facing something that made the void swarm look like a minor pest control problem. They were going to ask the same species that treated cosmic horrors as pop quizzes to somehow find a solution to beings who built weapons out of dead stars. The really terrifying part, was that everyone in the chamber genuinely believed the humans might actually have an answer. "Draft the message," Chancellor Morvek ordered, his voice carrying the weight of someone signing a contract with forces beyond comprehension. "Mark it as Priority Alpha Prime, and add a note requesting their current academic calendar. If they're going to save us again, I want to know if this falls during their examination period." The human response to the Architect crisis arrived in 36 hours, and its contents would fundamentally alter the Council's understanding of what humanity considered an appropriate escalation of force. Council request acknowledged. Situation assessment complete. The Architects represent a Class 13 stellar engineering threat, which falls under the jurisdiction of our graduate studies program. We'll deploy the Prometheus research expedition to investigate and neutralize. ETA, 8 standard months. Admiral Helena Kurtz, commanding. 8 months. The Architects were 18 months away from firing position, and the humans were planning to intercept them in 8. Which meant they would be engaging the enemy in deep space, far from any possible support or fallback positions. But it was the follow-up transmission that sent ice through the veins of every council member. Please note, this mission will serve as the capstone project for our Advanced Theoretical Physics Doctorate program. Expedition team consists of 47 graduate students, 12 postdoctoral researchers, and associated support staff. Mission parameters include close-range analysis of Architect technology, development of countermeasures, and practical demonstration of humanity's postgraduate research capabilities. Graduate students. The humans were sending their graduate students to confront beings who built weapons out of neutron stars. Admiral Kexathera studied the personnel files that accompanied the mission brief, and each entry read like a scientific impossibility made manifest. Dr. Marcus Chen, age 26, dissertation topic: Practical Applications of Weaponized Stellar Mechanics. Dr. Sarah Williams, age 28, research focus: Temporal Engineering for Large-Scale Construction Projects. Dr. James Rodriguez, age 25, thesis title: Defensive Applications of Controlled Black Hole Generation. These weren't just graduate students, they were the products of an educational system that treated the manipulation of cosmic forces as advanced coursework. The Prometheus research expedition itself defied every principle of military ship design in the Galactic database. Rather than the heavily armored dreadnoughts that conventional wisdom would prescribe for such a mission, the human vessel appeared to be a hybrid between a warship and a research laboratory. Its hull was lined with sensor arrays that could analyze matter at the subatomic level while operating inside a stellar corona. Its weapon systems included devices that the technical specifications cheerfully described as experimental implementations of theoretical physics concepts. But it was the mission timeline that truly revealed the scope of human ambition. Phase 1. Approach and observe Architect construction techniques. Phase 2. Develop theoretical framework for counter-engineering applications. Phase 3. Implement practical countermeasures using available resources. Phase 4. Submit findings for peer review and doctoral committee evaluation. They were planning to save the galaxy and earn their doctorates in the same mission. The Prometheus launched from Sol System with the same bureaucratic efficiency that characterized all human military operations. Admiral Kurtz's departure message was a masterpiece of academic professionalism applied to cosmic warfare. Prometheus research expedition departing Sol System on schedule. All research parameters confirmed and logged. Expect regular status updates as communication arrays permit. Current hypothesis: Architect technology represents advanced application of unified field theory principles. Alternative hypothesis: Architect technology operates outside conventional physics framework. We'll test both theories through direct observation and experimental interaction. Experimental interaction. The humans were planning to conduct experiments on beings who manipulated pulsars. As the months passed, the Prometheus transmitted periodic updates that chronicled humanity's first contact with truly godlike entities. Each report read like a scientific paper written by someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved through applied research and creative thinking. Month 3 status report. Successfully achieved observation range of Architect construct. Initial analysis confirms Dyson sphere utilizes exotic matter infrastructure with properties inconsistent with standard model physics. Team has developed 3 theoretical approaches to structural disruption, beginning practical testing phase. Month 5 status report. Architect entities have acknowledged our presence and initiated what appears to be a communication protocol based on gravitational wave modulations. Dr. Chen's linguistic analysis team has made preliminary progress in establishing basic conceptual exchange. Note: architects seem confused by our research-based approach to first contact. Month 7 status report. Breakthrough achieved. Architect technology confirmed to operate through controlled manipulation of dark energy matrices. Dr. Williams's engineering team has successfully replicated basic principles on laboratory scale, beginning development of countermeasure applications. Also note, architects have expressed what our xenopsychology specialist interprets as academic curiosity regarding human scientific methods. Academic curiosity. The beings who built weapons out of dead stars were curious about human research techniques. The final transmission from the Prometheus arrived just as long-range sensors detected massive gravitational distortions in the deep space region where the Architect construct had been located. Mission parameters successfully completed. Architect threat neutralized through application of inverted dark energy cascade, resulting in controlled disassembly of stellar construct. Architect entities have agreed to relocate to extragalactic regions in exchange for copies of our research data and an invitation to attend next year's Unified Field Theory Symposium. Note: several architect entities have expressed interest in our doctoral program. Recommend expanding alien exchange student protocols. The galaxy had been saved by a doctoral thesis defense. In the wake of what xenohistorians would record as the academic solution, the galactic community found itself grappling with a reality that transcended their wildest theoretical frameworks. Within the span of 18 months, humanity had not only neutralized 2 extinction-level threats, but had somehow managed to convert cosmic horrors into research opportunities and diplomatic exchanges. The Galactic Council chambers had been renovated 3 times to accommodate the flood of new member applications from species who had previously considered themselves too advanced, too dangerous, or too alien for conventional diplomatic relations. The waiting list now included entities that existed as pure energy, civilizations that had transcended physical form, and at least one collective consciousness that communicated exclusively through controlled stellar ignition patterns. But it was the establishment of the Human Educational Exchange Program that truly revolutionized interstellar civilization. Within 6 months of the Architect incident, every major academic institution in the galaxy had submitted formal requests to participate in humanity's educational system. The University of Corinthia, whose military academies had trained generals for 3 millennia, now offered exchange programs to human institutions they had never heard of. The Zalani Navigation Institute, masters of space-time manipulation, had established a sister campus relationship with what humans casually referred to as Titan Community College. Dr. Zenth of the Galactic Physics Institute had spent the last year attempting to audit human undergraduate courses through holographic projection systems. His experiences, documented in what became the most widely read scientific memoir in galactic history, painted a picture of an educational methodology that treated impossible scenarios as routine homework assignments. Day 47 of Human Physics 101, his journal entry read, "Today's laboratory exercise involved calculating orbital mechanics for hypothetical planets with non-Euclidean geometry. When I pointed out that such calculations were theoretically impossible, the instructor, a 20-year-old human named Jennifer, looked at me with what I can only describe as polite confusion and suggested I think outside the box. She then proceeded to demonstrate the solution using what she called basic trigonometry, applied to 4-dimensional space. The cultural exchange programs had produced their own revelations. Thaxian warriors, bred for combat excellence across generations of selective breeding, found themselves humbled by human children playing what they called playground games. A documentary crew following a group of Thaxian military observers at a human elementary school had captured footage that became required viewing in xenopsychology courses across the galaxy. The human younglings, reported senior warcast Thaxan in his official analysis, engage in recreational activities that would constitute advanced survival training in our most elite military programs. They call it dodgeball. We call it projectile evasion under pressure with real-time threat assessment. They laugh while doing it. The economic implications were equally staggering. Human commercial ventures had begun offering services that redefined the concept of cosmic logistics. Impossible Transit Solutions, Inc. provided cargo delivery through regions of space that had been considered permanently inaccessible. Their marketing slogan, "If physics says no, we say maybe," had become a galactic catchphrase. The company's founder, a former human naval cadet named Marcus Thompson, had given an interview that crystallized humanity's approach to cosmic challenges. "Look, the universe is basically just a really big engineering problem, right? You've got rules, You've got constraints, you've got objectives. Sometimes the rules seem contradictory, but that just means you haven't found the right perspective yet. We teach our kids to color outside the lines. Turns out that works pretty well when the lines are natural laws. But it was the establishment of the Terran Institute for Cosmic Problem Solving that perhaps best exemplified humanity's unique position in galactic civilization. The Institute, founded by Admiral Chen after her retirement from active service, had become the destination of choice for entities facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. The Institute's mission statement was a masterpiece of human understatement. When conventional solutions prove inadequate, sometimes you need to approach problems from a human perspective. Their case files read like a compendium of cosmic impossibilities solved through applied creativity. The Crystalline Collective's dimensional phase shift crisis, resolved through what the Institute's report described as percussive maintenance applied to quantum resonance fields. The Void Wraith incursion into the Andromeda Galaxy, neutralized by convincing the entities that they were participating in an elaborate reality television show. The temporal paradox that had been threatening to unravel the Centauri system, fixed by having a human teenager explain to the universe why causality loops were totally uncool. Each solution followed the same basic pattern. Take a problem that had confounded the galaxy's greatest minds, apply human logic that ignored traditional limitations, and somehow produce results that worked despite violating every principle of conventional wisdom. The most recent case file had arrived just that morning, transmitted from the edge of galactic space, where the entropy lords had been detected conducting experiments that threatened to accelerate universal heat death by several billion years. The Institute's response was already being prepared. A team of human undergraduate students, led by a graduate teaching assistant working on her master's thesis in applied cosmic engineering, would be departing within the week. Their mission parameters were simple: figure out how to convince abstract concepts of universal decay to find a more constructive hobby. The morning that would forever change the galaxy's understanding of educational methodology began like any other day in the Human Colonial Defense Academy's Advanced Cosmic Engineering program. Professor Elena Vasquez was conducting what her syllabus described as Practical Applications of Universal Constant Manipulation, a senior-level course that other species educational institutions had classified as theoretically impossible and potentially reality-threatening. Her students, a mix of 22-year-old humans and exchange students from 17 different species, were working on their final project presentations when the emergency alert arrived from the Terran Institute for Cosmic Problem Solving. "Class," Professor Vasquez announced with the casual tone she might use to discuss homework assignments. "We've just received a priority request from the Institute. The Entropy Lord situation has escalated beyond initial parameters. They've apparently decided that universal heat death is taking too long and have begun implementing what their communications describe as efficiency improvements to cosmic decay rates." The holographic display activated, showing real-time sensor data from the galactic rim. The readings painted a picture that defied comprehension: vast regions of space where the fundamental forces were being systematically unraveled, where matter itself was being convinced to forget how to exist. Current projections suggest that if left unchecked, the entropy lords will reduce the universe's remaining lifespan from approximately 14 billion years to somewhere in the neighborhood of next Tuesday. Professor Vasquez continued, her academic tone unchanged despite the cosmic implications. "This represents what we in the field call a significant scheduling conflict." A student raised her hand. Cadet Jennifer Martinez, whose undergraduate thesis on temporal mechanics for dummies had been translated into 47 languages and was currently required reading in most galactic physics programs. "Professor, has anyone tried just asking them to stop?" The question hung in the air with the weight of simplicity confronting complexity. Professor Vasquez paused, consulted her datapad, and then smiled with the expression of someone who had just witnessed a moment of pure educational brilliance. "You know, Jennifer, according to the Institute's preliminary contact reports, that approach hasn't actually been attempted. The Galactic Council's initial response was to deploy their most advanced quantum containment systems. When those proved inadequate, they escalated to theoretical weapons platforms designed to combat abstract concepts. Standard diplomatic protocols apparently didn't include, 'Have you considered not ending reality?' as an opening negotiation position. What happened next would be preserved in educational archives across the galaxy as a perfect example of humanity's approach to seemingly insurmountable problems." Professor Vasquez looked at her class of seniors, each of whom had spent 4 years learning to treat cosmic impossibilities as homework assignments, and made a decision that would reshape interstellar diplomacy. Change of plans, everyone. Your final project is now a field exercise. We're going to the Galactic Rim to have a conversation with abstract embodiments of universal decay. I want to see practical applications of everything you've learned about creative problem solving, unconventional thinking, and the fine art of making the impossible seem reasonable. The expedition that departed from Terra 3 days later consisted of 1 modified research vessel, 24 senior cadets, 3 graduate teaching assistants, and Professor Vasquez carrying what appeared to be a standard academic presentation folder. No weapon systems, no exotic defensive technologies, no emergency protocols for confronting entities that could unravel the fundamental forces of reality. Just a group of students planning to treat cosmic horror as a classroom discussion. The journey to the Galactic Rim took 6 weeks, during which the students prepared their approach with the methodical thoroughness that characterized human academic work. They researched communication protocols for abstract entities, developed theoretical frameworks for negotiating with concepts rather than beings, and practiced presentation techniques for audiences whose very existence challenged the basic assumptions of reality. The Entropy Lords, when the human expedition finally encountered them, were everything the reports had suggested and more. They existed as living contradictions, entities that were simultaneously the absence of energy and the presence of decay, beings whose thoughts were the mathematical expressions of thermodynamic inevitability. Their response to humanity's arrival was immediate and absolute. They began accelerating local entropy rates with the intention of reducing the human expedition to component atoms as quickly as possible. Jennifer Martinez, who had volunteered to serve as the expedition's primary spokesperson, activated the communication array and delivered what would later be studied in diplomatic academies across the galaxy as the most effective opening statement in the history of interspecies relations. Hi there, we're students from Terra, and we were wondering if you had a few minutes to talk about your project. We think what you're doing is really interesting, but we were hoping you might consider some alternative approaches that could achieve your goals without the whole ending everything that exists component. The Entropy Lords paused. For the first time in their existence, entities that embodied the universe's inevitable march toward maximum entropy encountered something they had never experienced: polite curiosity about their work rather than terrified resistance to their purpose. What followed was perhaps the most unprecedented diplomatic exchange in the history of cosmic civilization, a polite academic discussion between human students and the abstract embodiments of universal entropy about project management, timeline optimization, and alternative career paths. The Entropy Lords, entities whose very existence was predicated on the inevitable heat death of all things, found themselves explaining their motivations to a group of 22-year-old humans who listened with the attentive interest typically reserved for thesis presentations. Your concern is understandable, Jennifer Martinez replied after the Lords had outlined their efficiency improvements to cosmic decay. But have you considered that accelerating universal entropy might actually be counterproductive to your long-term objectives? I mean, if you succeed too quickly, you'll essentially work yourselves out of a job. The concept of job security had never occurred to beings whose purpose was the elimination of all work, energy, and existence. The pause that followed was measurable in cosmic timescales, as entities that had spent eons planning the universe's destruction contemplated the possibility of unemployment. Professor Vasquez stepped forward with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades helping students work through complex theoretical problems. What Jennifer is suggesting is a more sustainable approach to entropy maximization. Have you considered entropy as a long-term career rather than a short-term project? The negotiations that followed would be studied in business schools across the galaxy as a masterclass in stakeholder management and strategic planning. The human expedition helped the Entropy Lords develop a comprehensive timeline that would achieve their goals of universal heat death while maintaining steady employment opportunities across cosmic timescales. The solution was elegantly simple. Instead of accelerating entropy rates, the Lords would establish what Professor Vasquez termed sustainable decay practices. They would work in measured intervals, allowing the universe to naturally approach maximum entropy while providing themselves with billions of years of meaningful work. The approach included regular performance reviews, clearly defined milestones, and opportunities for professional development in related fields, such as controlled chaos implementation and strategic void management. But it was the final component of the agreement that truly demonstrated humanity's unique approach to cosmic problem-solving. The Entropy Lords, impressed by the humans' organizational skills and project management expertise, formally requested to audit courses at the Human Colonial Defense Academy. We believe their communication matrix pulsed with what could only be described as enthusiasm, that your educational methodology could significantly improve our operational efficiency. We would particularly like to attend your seminars on time management for cosmic scale projects and effective communication strategies for abstract entities. The return journey to Terra was marked by what Professor Vasquez would later describe in her mission report as the most successful field exercise in the history of academic diplomacy. Her students had not only prevented the accelerated heat death of the universe, but had somehow convinced the personifications of cosmic entropy to consider career counseling. The final examination grades were submitted the following week. Every student received full marks, with special commendations for innovative problem solving, effective cross-cultural communication, and maintaining academic standards under cosmic pressure. But it was Jennifer Martinez's final thesis presentation that would become legendary throughout human academic circles. Standing before a review board that included Professor Vasquez, 3 department heads, and, via quantum entanglement communication array, 2 entropy lords who had specifically requested to participate in the evaluation process, she delivered a presentation titled Applied Diplomacy for Universal Scale Crisis Management, a case study in entropy negotiation. Her conclusion would be quoted in academic papers for generations. The key to solving impossible problems isn't to fight against cosmic forces. It's to help them find better ways to achieve their goals. Sometimes the universe doesn't need heroes. Sometimes it just needs good project managers. The ceremony where the Galactic Council formally recognized humanity as the designated mediators for cosmic-scale diplomatic crises was attended by representatives from over 300 species, 17 energy-based collectives, 43 hive minds, and a small delegation of abstract mathematical concepts who had expressed interest in establishing formal diplomatic relations. Admiral Chen, now serving as Terra's Director of Impossible Solutions, delivered the acceptance speech with the characteristic understatement that had become humanity's diplomatic signature. We're honored by the Council's confidence in our problem-solving capabilities. We look forward to continuing our educational mission of helping the universe work through its issues using practical applications of applied common sense, creative thinking, and the occasional well-timed conversation. The speech concluded with the traditional human educational motto that had become the unofficial slogan of galactic diplomacy. No problem is truly impossible. It just requires the right perspective and a willingness to think outside the box, even if the box happens to be the fundamental structure of reality itself. As the ceremony ended and delegates from across the galaxy began discussing their own cosmic-scale problems that might benefit from the human approach, a new era of interstellar relations began. An era where extinction-level threats were treated as learning opportunities, where cosmic horrors became research subjects, and where the universe's most intractable problems were solved by the simple expedient of asking politely if everyone involved had considered alternative approaches. The galaxy had learned what humanity had known all along. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is a well-educated student with a reasonable question and the audacity to believe that even gods can learn something new. The galaxy had spent eons searching for warriors to fight its nightmares. Instead, it found teachers who convinced the nightmares to enroll in continuing education. And so, the galaxy learned that sometimes the universe's greatest problems don't need warriors or devastating weapons. They just need someone willing to ask the right questions and think outside the box. This story shows us that humanity's true strength doesn't lie in our technology or military might, but in our ability to approach the impossible with curiosity, creativity, and above all, the audacity to believe that any problem can be solved if you know how to ask the right questions. If this journey made you feel proud to be human, if it gave you chills imagining cadets saving the galaxy as a training exercise, or if it simply made you smile thinking about our incredible ability to turn cosmic nightmares into learning opportunities, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that celebrate what makes our species truly special in the universe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any adventures where humanity proves that no problem is too big for a little ingenuity and a lot of common sense. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until the next story that will make you proud to be human.